Hi, I'm Walt Anderson of Prescott College. I'm here on the banks of Granite Creek in Granite Dells in Prescott, Arizona. And I want to talk to you today about one of my favorite mammals, the beaver. Here in Arizona, water is a fairly limited and precious resource. And about 90% of the riparian areas in the state have been destroyed, either degraded or drained or pumped out or developed in some way. So those riparian areas are mostly gone. But around Prescott we have some left, and one of the best is the Upper Verde River, which flows for about 25 miles from its headwaters near Sullivan Lake, near Paulden, down to Clarkdale and Cottonwood, and then further on down ultimately to the Phoenix area. The Verde River is extremely important ecologically, and it has shown tremendous recovery in recent years thanks to the Endangered Species Act, which forced the Forest Service and some of the ranchers to pull cattle back from the river stream because of endangered fishes. And this has had a tremendous amount of recovery. 20 years ago when I first went to the Verde River, I was not impressed. It looked like a big degraded cow pasture with the banks broken down and tremendous amount of cow pies and other damage like this, and I didn't see an awful lot of ecological potential. But one of the great things about riparian areas is that it's just one of those magic recipes. Just add water, and in this case remove a stressor with the presence of the water, and we were able to see remarkable recovery in the last 20 years. One of the things that's occurred is that beavers have returned to the Verde River in large numbers, and following on their heels have been river otters and a whole diversity of other things. And part of this, of course, is that beavers and cows don't mix very well. But the cows eat down the young willows, trample the banks, remove the vegetation that might provide some cover for them, and the beavers simply don't do well in heavily grazed areas. This has become really obvious to me when, a few years ago, when my class in wetland ecology and management at Prescott College went out under a grant from the Nature Conservancy to do a study on beaver densities, distribution, and habitat preferences along the Upper Verde River. We were astonished with what we found. We found many beaver dams and lodges, probably missed some because there had been some high water floods during that summer during the monsoons. But what we found was really quite impressive. We found one beaver dam, even after some enormous floods that went through, that was 351 feet long, zigzagging among the trees and creating a pool that was more than a half a mile long. This pool in turn became a nursery for emergent plants like cattails and bulrushes, which then became the preferred food of the beavers. And so although the beavers often cut trees down when they're establishing their territories, both for food and for their lodges and dens in some cases, and primarily for those reasons, in this case they shifted their feeding habits mostly to the emergent vegetation, to the rhizomes and roots of the cattails and bulrushes, because it's a lot easier to do that than to chew a tree. So the damage to the trees was minimized. In fact, the amount of bank storage on this pond, because of the presence of the beavers, increased the riparian area, increased the area that was saturated with water, allowed more cottonwoods and willow and ash, like I'm standing next to here, and box elder and things like that to thrive. So the beavers really created a much greater wetland area, riparian area, woodland, and that has had tremendous consequences to bringing in many kinds of other wildlife as well, including the river otters, which simply love beaver ponds and the channels that they create above and below. And so otters have come back, and otters are feeding upon some of the introduced fishes that were threatening the native fishes, things like catfish and bass and sunfish and things like that. They may take some of the natives, but it seems like the natives do very well in the presence of beaver. And one of the most remarkable things was in this last year, when we were there just a few months ago, there were tremendous numbers of lowland leopard frogs. This is a native species that has been in decline everywhere that bullfrogs had been introduced. And when I first saw the Upper Verde River, the bullfrogs were dominating and leopard frogs were not to be seen. However, now, perhaps because of the beaver activity and perhaps the otters as well, we're not really sure exactly why, but correlated with their presence, the bullfrogs have declined and the leopard frogs are coming back. And that's really significant, really important thing. We also noticed many species of birds frequenting the cattails, the bulrushes, and the trees around those ponds. We also saw that the presence of these dams reduced the impacts of the floods. Because the riverbanks had been beaten down and overgrazed for so long, when flash floods came through, they just ripped on through. The water was not stored in the system. It rushed on down, carrying a lot of soil with it, and really was not retained in the system to do its ecological services. But with the beavers there, the dams, during one of these big floods, a series of 3 dams, the top one blew out, the second one took some damage, and the third big dam showed no damage at all, even though probably a wall of water 25, 30 feet high came through that area. Part of that is because the dams help to dissipate the energy of those floods, and part of it is because the pools themselves with the still water will slow that and dissipate the energy so that when the flood comes into that pond, it slows down and consequently diminishes the impact of the flood. Then those waters are stored in the banks and stored in the pools and released on a time release basis, and that benefits everything downstream. So the beavers are really amazing ecological engineers. And while in some cases in urban environments they may remove some of the trees that you might desire, the simple thing to do is to fence off those large trees that you want to protect. And otherwise they seem to do a tremendous amount of ecological benefit, as well as having the advantage of increasing wildlife, which everybody loves to see. I would love to see beavers brought back into the Prescott area directly. Granite Creek here is a tributary of the Verde River, although it flows underground for many miles out past Chino Valley before it gets to its confluence with the main stem of the Verde River. But I think beavers would do a good job here in areas where cottonwoods, willows, ash, box elder, etc. are increasing at an enormous rate, especially someplace like where Willow Creek comes into Willow Lake, because there's an abundance of willows, young willows and cottonwoods, as well as cattails and bulrush, a perfect food supply for the beavers. And since the people of the city of Prescott are concerned about the eutrophication or the enrichment of the lakes from too much organic matter, as well as other releases from human activities, this is causing impairment of the lakes. I believe the beaver activity would probably reduce some of that vegetation, which in late summer rots and respires and consequently takes oxygen out of the water, deoxygenates the water. So I think beavers would be a win-win situation. We'd have wildlife that we could appreciate here, right in town, big attraction. Maybe otters should be next, I'm not sure about that. But in any case, I think beavers would really help that ecosystem. And surely we have to look after the Watson-Willow Lake ecosystem, which is one of the richest waterfowl areas in the state. And the beauty of that is that it's all happened within the last 10 or 15 years when the city of Prescott bought the water rights from the Chino Valley Irrigation District. So that those lakes that were drained in the summer in the past for irrigation out in Chino Valley area have now become year-round meccas for recreation and for wildlife. And the wildlife have responded in unbelievable ways. There's tremendous concentrations of water birds there. Bald eagles and peregrine falcons feed at the top of the food web there. Ospreys as well on the fish that are in the lakes. Cormorants, egrets, herons, waterfowl of many kinds. The diversity is incredible. There are 8 swans on the lake at this moment as I speak, as well as a bald eagle sitting in a snag, waiting to come down and catch a trout as has been introduced into the lake. So these are really precious resources, and the people of Prescott really have, and elsewhere, have come to appreciate these precious ecosystems. It's now been declared an important bird area by the National Audubon Society. It's gotten recognition that way. And I tell members of the City Council at Prescott that the lakes here in Prescott could either be our paradise spot, our oasis, or they could be the cesspool of Prescott. It all depends on how they're managed. And so I think it's my priority, as well as many others, to educate all people, including the council, of how important these lakes are and how important it is to maintain high water quality, wildlife habitat, recreational opportunities, and there will be nothing else like it in central Arizona and for many, many miles around. So I'm very pleased to be living in the Prescott area, where there does seem to be some enlightenment occurring recently, and I'm hoping that my knowledge of the ecosystems and of wildlife will help with that enlightenment. And so it's a pleasure to talk to you today about one of my favorite creatures, the beaver.